okay, it's not, I wanted to say Suetonius, but it's Suetonius and Pliny. I practiced those and now I completely forgot. But anyway, we'll stumble through these guys. Okay, in your handout, I gave you this chart, which I modified some. It was from a website called Christian Today, and but I thought it had a lot of people besides the three main ones that we're going to talk about. So anyway, I don't think I'll spend the time, since I did take a lot extra on our prayer list, but you're welcome to look through those, and I think I found it interesting. And the ones that we have are mentioned on here too. Yes. Okay. And then I also gave you a map so you can kind of see the area that the Roman Empire and some of these guys that we were going to talk about, it will tell you where they're at. So when we're mentioning them, you might want to look back and see, oh, that's where that is. And in case this was of interest to me, what's that? Where is that? So we'll be mentioning Gallia up there, which is actually France, and we'll be mentioning Asia, Western Asia, which is actually Turkey. I don't think we have any of those others in here, but anyway, that's just to kind of get your setting to where we're at. Something else I gave you was a list of the emperors, and I gave you all the way, I think, to wherever they are, from Julius, the very beginning to the very end, Romulus Augustulus. But the ones we'll be talking about today are mainly, I think Claudius will be mentioned, in Nero and Galba and Otho and Vertellus and Vespasian, but mainly Titus and Domitian and Nerva and Trajan are these four over here, the Flavian dynasty, and the first ones in the five good emperors. We'll talk about those. Okay, so we are ready to go. And here is, starting with Josephus, and this is just from the book, and also from some of them I hunted up other information on the internet. He was a Jew born in 37 or 38 AD, the son of Matthias, and that's not the Matthias that was the apostle, it's some other Matthias, but he is a Jew, and that was a nice Jewish name. He took the name of Flaviu in honor of the Flavian emperors, and that was on your chart there we just mentioned. At the age of 26, he visited Rome and was so impressed that he spent the rest of his life trying to bring about better relations between the Jews and the Romans. And he was so highly respected by the Romans that he was with Titus when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. I thought, oh my, I would have thought the Jews would have considered him a traitor for sure. I mean, he was, anyway, I don't know how the Jews thought of him, but the Romans evidently liked him, and he evidently liked them. He wrote the history of the destruction of Jerusalem in 7 books entitled History of the Jewish War. And I was going to see what this book had in it. This is the copy we have, The Life and Works of Josephus, translated by Whiston. So I don't know, anyway, it has a lot of stuff in it. And the stuff we're going to talk about, he also wrote Jewish Antiquities and his autobiography. I think the parts where he mentions Jesus are going to be in here, and I don't know what else. I should have looked that up. It's got a list. Oh, Antiquities of the Jews and Wars of the Jews is what it has. So and in those we're going to be talking about Jesus. So this is what Josephus, who really did not believe in Jesus, wrote, because he was a historian, and that's what these guys, most of the people we're talking about today, they're historians, so they were trying to write the facts. At that time lived Jesus, a wise man, if he may be called a man, for he performed many wonderful works. He was a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to to him many Jews and Gentiles. This was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the instigation of the chief men among us, had condemned him to the cross, they who before had conceived an affection for him did not cease to adhere to him. That's not my common language. It's like, okay, this is, it's not Ozark language. He speaks in better words, so I'm trying to say them correctly. For on the third day he appeared to them alive again, the divine prophets having foretold these and many other wonderful things concerning him, and the sect of the Christians so called from him subsist this time. Okay, looking at that passage, some scholars reject it because it doesn't sound like somebody who didn't like Christians. I mean, the things he told were all things that we have heard from the Bible that sounded accurate, and he was complimentary. I mean, he called him a wise man, and if he could be called a man, so and the wonderful works and all the way the people listen to him. So some people say, well, that it's not accurate. It's out of place in the context of discussing seditions. Well, to the Jews, Christianity was a sedition, and to the Romans it was some sort of sedition also. So I don't see that part. The defense, it appears in every copy of Josephus that we have. And another historian, Christian historian later on, Eusebius, quoted it twice as early as 315 AD. So anyway, that's what he said about Jesus. He also mentions Jesus when he describes the death of James. But this younger Annas, remember Caiaphas and Annas were the high priest when Jesus was killed? Annas, who took the high priesthood, was a bold man in his temper and very insolent. When therefore he thought he now had a proper opportunity to exercise his authority, he assembled the Sanhedrin and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some other, whom, when he had formed an accusation against them, he delivered them to be stoned. So again, he mentions Jesus. And he mentions John the Baptist. And you'll find this interesting, pretty much what we know from the Bible. But some of the Jews were of opinion that God had suffered Herod's whole army to be destroyed as a just punishment on him for the death of John called the Baptist. For Herod, who killed him, who was a just man, and had called upon the Jews to be baptized and to practice virtue, exercising both justice toward men and piety toward God. For so would baptism be acceptable to God if they made use of it, not of the expiation of their sins, but for the purity of the body, the mind being first purified by righteousness. And many coming to him, for they were wonderfully taken with his discourses, Herod was seized with apprehension, lest his authority should be led into sedition against him, for they seemed capable of undertaking anything by his direction. Herod therefore thought it better to take him off before any disturbance happened, than to run the risk of affairs, and repenting when it should be too late to remedy disorders. Being taken up upon this suspicion of Herod, and being sent bound to the castle of Machaerus, just mentioned, he was slain there. The Jews were of opinion that the destruction of Herod's army was punishment upon him for that action, God being displeased with him. So, with that pretty long statement, I probably didn't need to read all of that, but I thought it all fits what we know, except he didn't tell about Herodias and cutting his head off, but he did talk about being imprisoned and he was killed. This is accepted as genuine even by the most critical. It's quoted by Origen, we'll learn about him later, and Eusebius and Jerome. In this context, Josephus corroborates many facts recorded in our gospel accounts. Anything else you would like to say about Josephus? Anybody else know anything about him that we didn't discuss? You can read the big book here and you would know a lot. Okay, the next guy that Dr. Mattox talks about is Tacitus, Carius Cornelius Tacitus, 56 AD to 120 AD. wrote about his writings were about the year 100, and he had a strong dislike for Christians. He was a Roman historian from a wealthy family living in Gallia, and that's where I showed you on the map would be France now. He received the best education available and excelled in public speaking skills, oratory, and debate. Was a senator during the reign of Domitian. You remember who was the really evil one who was very bad at persecuting Christians. He was a suffect consul under the Emperor Nerva. He had a governorship of the Roman province of Asia in western Anatolia. His writings are full of tales of corruption, government scandal, and innocent people being destroyed because of the emperor's lust for power. Now, there are only parts of the 16 books he wrote, so we don't have all his writings. But we have there was the Annals, which chronicles Roman history from the death of the Emperor Augustus in AD 14. He was the first emperor on our list. Well, actually the second one, because Julio Claudian, no, he is the first, Augustus, the very first one. So he wrote this, talking about from Emperor Augustus down through Emperor Nero. So the first 5 emperors he wrote. His histories from AD 69 to the end of the Flavian dynasty, which Flavian dynasty was all the way down to Domitian. Surviving sections show the political upheavals and power struggles that defined this era, including the reigns of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Okay. And this is where he mentions Christians. I'm sorry that I'm just reading this, but anyway, that's what I'm doing. In his book, The Annals, book 15, he talks about Christians. But neither all human help, nor the liberality of the emperor, nor all the atonements presented to the gods avail to abate the infamy he lay under of having ordered the city to be set on fire. So who's he talking about there? Who said Nero? Yeah. To suppress, therefore, this common rumor, Nero procured others to be accused and inflicted exquisite punishment upon those people who were in abhorrence for their crimes and were commonly known by the name of Christians. So here we have the record of how Nero persecuted the Christians. They had their denomination from Christus, or Christ, who in the reign of Tiberius was put to death as a criminal by the procurator Pontius Pilate. This pernicious superstition, though checked for a while, broke out again and spread not only over Judea, the source of this evil, but reached this city also, whither flow from all quarters all things vile and shameful, and where they find shelter and encouragement. So he was not very flattering of Rome. Rome is where all things vile comes from, and he wasn't very flattering of Judea either. The source of, and that was the source of where this evil of Christians came from. So, very interesting. Okay. Oh, we're still going here. At first, they were only apprehended who confessed themselves of that sect. Afterwards, a vast multitude discovered by them, all of which were condemned, not so much for the crime of burning the city, as for their enmity to mankind. Their executions were so contrived as to expose them to derision and contempt. Some were covered with the skins of wild beasts and torn in pieces by dogs. Some were crucified. Others, having been daubed over with combustible materials, were set up as lights in the nighttime and thus burned to death. Nero made use of his own gardens as a theater upon this occasion, and also exhibited the diversions of the circus, sometimes standing in the crowd as a spectator in the habit of a charioteer, at other times driving a chariot himself, till at length these men, though really criminal and deserving exemplary punishment, began to be commiserated as people who were destroyed not out of regard to the public welfare, but only to gratify the cruelty of one man. So, terrible things, but so terrible that even this Roman historian could say that it was not just for them to be killed in this way. Okay. This testimony, which is unchallenged, historically states that Christ is the founder. It said it was by Christus, and that he was put to death as a criminal by Pontius Pilate. That I should have let you tell me these things. This is just a repeating. His death took place with Tiberius was emperor, and it says he concludes therefore he must have been born under the reign of Augustus. That it's a pernicious superstition that it began in Judea and was suppressed at a time, then broke out again and reached Rome before Tacitus wrote his annals. They were persecuted in Rome as early as AD 64. Vast multitudes were executed to gratify the cruelty of one man. Tacitus recognized they were innocent of the crimes charged against them. Okay. So it confirms the facts of the gospel. The book of Acts is related to Christians scattered all over the empire as early as 30 years after the death of Christ. If Jesus was around 33 when he died, 30 to 60, that was 60-some, so that's when this took place. Christianity is not a synthesis of or growth of myths of mystery religion. So that was confirmed by Tacitus. They didn't see it as something from some other religion. It was their own superstition. Suetonius, born about 88 AD, he was a Roman writer. He wrote a book called The 12 Caesars. It tells about their ancestry, early life, their wars, their public events, and political reforms. It's not a comprehensive history, but an insight into their strengths and frailties. It sounded almost like he would have been a gossip columnist, because it said anecdotes of private habits, juicy and sometimes shocking details of what the emperors got up to when they were not busy ruling. So, in his life of Claudius, and all of these things that Tacitus and Suetonius, these guys are, I mean, you can, there are archives on the internet. They're free for you to look at. I mean, anything that's beyond a certain time period doesn't have a copyright to it. So these, you can read, but as you can see from me reading, their wording is a little bit not quite the way we say things. It's a little hard to read through some of them, but you can read all of their writings as much as you want. But we're just talking about where they mention Jesus or Christ. In his life of Claudius, he says, because the Jews at Rome caused contentious disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from the city. And that confirms what we had in Acts 18, verse about Priscilla and Aquila being had to flee from Rome. And in his life of Nero, he says punishments were also inflicted on Christians, a sect professing a new and mischievous religious belief. So that confirms that the Christian religion did arise in the time that the New Testament sets forth. And the next guy, Pliny the Younger, or Pliny, he was the nephew of Pliny the Elder. His political career was through Domitian, Nerva, and Trajan. Under Trajan, he became the governor of Bithynia, which is present-day Turkey. Famous for his writings, one about the eruption of Mount Vespucius. That would have been interesting. And his correspondence with Emperor Trajan regarding Christians, and that's the part we're going to talk about. He wrote some letters seeking his advice, and Trajan responded. So, this is what he wrote. It is my rule, sire, to refer to you in matters where I am uncertain. I was never present at any trial of Christians, therefore I do not know what the customary penalties and what limits are observed. I have hesitated a great deal on the question whether there should be any distinction of ages, whether the weak should have the same treatment as the more robust, whether those who recant should be pardoned, Meanwhile, this is the course that I have adopted in the case of those brought before me as Christians. I have asked them if they are Christians. If they admit it, I repeat the question second and third time, threatening capital punishment if they persist. I sentence them to death. For I do not doubt that whatever crime it may be which they have confessed, their inflexible obstinacy should be punished. That reminds me, there's a scripture somewhere that's talked about whenever you stand firm for your faith, that is what Christians should do, but other people will see that as being as you being some evil person. So that's the way they looked at it because they would not give in. My dealing with the question led to a wider spread of the charge, and a great variety of cases were brought before me. All who denied that they were or had been Christians, I discharged because they called upon the gods at my dictation and did reverence with incense and wine to your image, together with the statues of the deities, and especially because they cursed Christ, a thing which it is said genuine Christians cannot be induced to do. Others declaring that they had been, but were so no longer, that the sum of their guilt or error had amounted to that on an appointed day they had been accustomed to meet before daybreak to recite a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bind themselves by an oath to abstain from theft, robbery, adultery, and breach of faith. After this ceremony, it was their custom to depart and meet again to take food, ordinary food, because they were accused of having lots of other things. And they had ceased this practice after my edict, in which I had forbidden secret societies. And continuing, I thought it necessary to find out what truth was in this by applying torture to 2 maidservants called deaconesses. But I found nothing but a depraved superstition, and I therefore postponed my examination to you for consultation. This superstition has spread out, not only in the cities, but in the villages and rural districts as well. There is no shadow of doubt that the temples, which have been almost deserted, are beginning to be frequented once more, that the sacred rites, which have been long neglected, are being renewed, and that sacrificial victims are for sale everywhere. So he's saying Christianity had become so observed that they weren't doing their worship in their pagan temples anymore, and since he has been punishing the Christians, then that's back to the way it was. So here's what Trajan says back to him. You have taken the right line, my dear Pliny, in examining the cases of those denounced to you as Christians, for no hard and fast rule can be laid down of universal application. They are not to be sought out. So this was his way of dealing with it. He wasn't going to go seek them out. If they are informed against and the charge is proved, they are to be punished with this reservation, that if anyone denies that he is a Christian and actually proves it, that is, by worshiping our gods, he should be pardoned as a result of his recantation, however suspect he may have been with respect to the past. Pamphlets published anonymously should carry no weight. There had been some pamphlets with people's names, and he said, you're not to do that. This constitutes a very bad precedent and are also out of keeping with this age, so they didn't live on that. Okay, so conclusion.
Linda?
Yes.
So on the Pliny and the response from the emperor, it sounds like many Christians were put on the spot.
Yeah.
And they weren't like we are today. They had to basically say, I am a Christian or I'm not, and go so far as to even bow down to the idols.
Right.
And I don't know, I thought I read somewhere where there was quite a number of them that did that.
That's
just the ones that were burned.
Okay. Yeah. we will learn some more, I think, when we get to the Christian side of it. This is the worldly side historians who wrote, and they wrote about the people that gave in, but if they didn't, they were killed, and that's what. But he's saying that he is reporting to his superior, which would be what he would say it. I'm dealing with this, and so it's not because if things are going back to the way they were the pagan, the deities that we are supposed to worship are being worshipped, and the Christians are not causing so much trouble. But on the other hand, this is down through Trajan, and it doesn't go any farther than that. So I don't know. Next week, Jan, I forget what Jan's going to be talking about. But anyway, later on we will see from the Christian side, and I think we'll